Thank you all so much for joining us for today's webinar, Overcoming Work at Home Loneliness. You can see we're all working from home today, so we're sort of properly dressed for the occasion. We're really excited about today's webinar because it's the first in a series where we're interviewing Jottful Community members so that they can share their experience and expertise with the rest of us. Jottful Community, of course, is where small business owners can connect with the best local experts for their website and online marketing. The way it works is that at Jottful, we refer our customers to community members who provide services like photography, content writing, graphic design, and so on. And in return, community members can refer small businesses to Jottful when they need a website. What we're really building here is a community of professionals who collaborate to provide a full suite of online marketing services for small business owners. And speaking of small business owners, we've also invited a few of our customers to join us to today's webinar. So please, welcome to all of you. Before I introduce our two guests, I'd love to cover just a couple of housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be able to share a link with you after the event is complete. And we welcome you to revisit the content yourself or go ahead and share it with others. We also invite your comments and questions. You'll see there's a little Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the guests at any point, just type it in there. We have a half hour today, so we'll do our best to get through those questions. All right, today's guests are Jen and Ashley. Jen Sako is a Pittsburgh-based content marketing writer. She writes blog posts and articles that boost brand awareness and trust, ultimately driving leads and freeing up her clients to focus on sales. Her specialties are in hospitality management, event planning, and promotion, as well as B2B music brand partnerships. Jen's been writing from her home office for 7 years now. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you.
And Ashley Arcel, she's also a copywriter specializing in SEO copywriting, search engine marketing, and social media marketing. She's a 2-time HubSpot certified specialist and has spent 5 years at an agency before launching her own ProLine Creative. Ashley's been working out of her Whitefish, Montana home for the past 5 years. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you.
Jen, so let's start with you. Can you just sort of give us an idea, first of all, of, we mentioned before you've been working at home for the past 7 years, but what caused you to make that transition?
We made a move. My family and I made a cross-country move from Texas to Pennsylvania, and we needed some time to settle in. My husband started working right away from the 24 hours after we landed in the city. He was at the office, so it was up to me to get us planted in the community, and during that time, I started looking at what can I do from home, because what I really needed was flexibility. We are in a tight-knit community, but with activities and school, I needed to be there to help our son transition into that and to get him to where he needed to be. And we don't even have school buses where we live. So the flexibility was really important to me. And I discovered I could really make a go from working from home.
Yeah. And Ashley, what about you? What brought you home?
Brought me home. I like that. I wrote all the way through college. I went to school for English literature. I wrote for magazines and things like that while I was in school. And then after school, I actually went to work as a midwife, which was wonderful and I loved it. But I was on call all the time. And when I got called to births, I would be gone like 36 hours sometimes. And at the time, I was actually working in a law office as my way to put myself through school. Yeah. Which was quickly not becoming viable because I was missing so many shifts. And I thought, well, why don't I just do what I love and what I know I'm good at? So I started freelancing and built that up over a couple of years. And that was what I was doing for income while I was in my midwifery internship. And then by the time I was ready to kind of transition out of midwifery, I had a fully formed, base of freelance clients. So I kind of just stepped from one thing right into the other, and it was really pretty seamless. It was I was lucky in that sense.
Yeah, when we spoke earlier, you were talking about how during your first year you were home a lot and you had a different schedule from other people. Can you talk a little bit about loneliness, especially during that first year?
Yeah, absolutely. So at that time, I lived in Bozeman, Montana, which is a rural little college town kind of in southwestern Montana. And my husband and I were doing some ranch management, which was his specialty, for some out-of-state landowners. So we lived in a canyon that faced north-south and got like 5 hours of sunlight every day in this little cabin, like way up in the woods. And it was very, very remote. And I was working from home. And I just felt really, really isolated, partially because of the location that we lived in, but also because I didn't have, a 9 to 5 where I had kind of like a built-in community from an office. And it was a really uncomfortable transition. I was on one hand thrilled to be running my own business and having all this freedom, but on the other hand, it was tough to kind of figure out how to structure myself and not feel very lonely in that capacity.
Yeah. And Jen, I know you had an interesting transition as well. When you first moved to Pittsburgh, you sort of also experienced that loneliness. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. When we moved, it was in the springtime, and both states, Texas and Pennsylvania, have beautiful springtimes. But then, when we had just a ball in the summer here, it was so nice, so much more pleasant than triple digits that I was used to. But then winter came, and I was not used to I had no idea what that meant. And it did mean lots of gray clouds, lots of people staying inside unless you had an activity that you like to do. If you like to ice skate or snow ski. But otherwise, people stayed inside. And that's when I started feeling I'm away from my family. I can't go to my sister's house. I can't go see my mom for lunch. And I'm feeling pretty isolated right now. Even though we weren't in a remote area, it felt remote. And that's when I started to experience my version of loneliness.
Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit about, Jen, some of the coping strategies you employed when you started to experience that. Can you share some of those with everyone?
Yes. I had to sort of plant myself where other people were, which meant outside the kindergarten doors. I made some friends that way, and just, started putting myself out there as I'm new to the community, what's going on. I started making friends and started to be invited to places and started inviting others out with me. So that was a way that I coped. And I'm sort of an introvert, except in business. But when I'm trying to meet people for myself, it can be a little uncomfortable. But people are generally nice and open, especially here in Pittsburgh. So that's what I started to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, Ashley, you started to actually meet people. You were kind of getting out as well, but more from a work perspective. Can you share sort of the coping strategies you employed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I realized pretty quickly that it was not difficult at all for me to have multiple days, especially when I was alone on the ranch out there, where I would not speak to another human being in person.
Right.
And that quickly became kind of a warning sign. So I started to do things, and just to be clear, I love working alone. I really thrive in that. I like that a lot. I don't necessarily want to lead a big team. That's not how I work best, but working alone and being isolated are two really different things.
Great point.
So I started actually taking advantage of co-working spaces and even kind of coffee shops and things like that, where there was a community of other freelancers, which I was lucky enough to live in a community where there was a big contingent of freelancers and people that were self-employed or working remotely. So it proved to be really helpful for me to just kind of like physically go to the spaces where those other people were and step into that community a bit. And I actually got some really great work connections from that as well. Like I met graphic designers that I still work with now. So it proved to be helpful on a couple levels.
Yeah, fantastic. I know that you also did some things to create some boundaries. I know when we talked before, you said that otherwise work can kind of leak out all over the place.
Yeah.
How did you create that kind of discipline and structure?
Yeah, it's what's that saying? entrepreneurs are the only people that will work 80 hours a week to avoid working 40 hours a week.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's I think we're definitely a group of type A, really driven people that have to install some boundaries, or else work just kind of runs roughshod over the rest of your life. So when I first started out, I didn't say no to anything because I wanted so badly to make it, in what I was doing. So I just took every job, and that really quickly led to me being incredibly busy. And I remember my schedule at one point, I was working from like 5 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Wow.
And I was just stressed out, and I wasn't doing anything well because I was doing way too much. So once things started to get salient enough that I could afford to start saying no to I called them like the high headache, low profit project. I started to I did a couple of things. I put work hours in place. So now I work from like 8 to 4 maximum. Pretty frequently I'll work from 8 to 3. Sometimes I extend that if I have a really big deadline, but generally I don't have to because it's structured well enough that it runs like that. I did things like I would put my phone on airplane mode in my office on its charger face down after dinner, and then not touch it until 7 o'clock the next morning. I don't answer emails after dinner. I try not to work on the weekends, although sometimes, again, if there's a big project that changes a bit. And I try to take at least one trip every year that's completely unplugged and, free from work. I think work, largely on every vacation I've ever taken. I was thinking before we got on this call that I worked like in a jungle in Mexico last winter for about a week, but I try to unplug at least for about a week every year to kind of give myself a break.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the reasons we chose this particular topic for our first webinar was just to help validate what other people were experiencing, right? And I think what you just said about how you have clients that are high headache, low profit is something that's probably also very validating for the people on this call. There's a lot of people have experienced that. And I think working with those kinds of clients is actually just part of the process of starting a business, right?
And you have to kind of, you have to say yes until you can afford to say no, I think.
Yeah. Jen, what did you do a little bit to create some structure? I know you've told me that you are most productive in the morning, and actually I think all three of us are really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true for me. And I can't say that I start my day every day at the same time. But I do always start with some alone time to get myself ready for my day, and that might be reading or moving around a little bit, taking a walk or something, and then I'm ready to sit down in the chair and start doing some work. And I not saying that I will dress professionally every day, but I don't want to work in my pajamas and robe all day. That's not me. I need to be in clothes that I could just leave the house if I needed to. And that helps me feel professional. And that's how I kind of set my boundaries. And then in the early afternoon, I need to leave my desk because I have some family commitments that I have to do. And then I'm back after dinner time to wrap things up, and that will probably take me a couple of hours to do that. So then I'm working probably until about 7 or 8, but after that it's family time again.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, that's really one of the benefits of running your own business, is that the ability to have that flexibility, and it also, frankly, just gets you out of the house while the sun is still up.
Yes, yes, and enjoying that time and taking advantage of the sun. It always lifts my spirits.
Yeah.
Even if I'm already feeling good, just to be outside for a little while and walk around a little bit and get the blood circulating. That always makes me feel so much more creative when I get back.
Yeah. And one of the things that we talked about is how easy it is to get distracted when you're working from home. And for me, the big distraction is an unclean house, right? I find myself cleaning the house just so I can work, and then I've killed a bunch of valuable, productive morning work time doing that. What do you do to avoid those kinds of distractions?
Well, I like to, something about having appliances run always makes me feel good too. So I feel like I'm multitasking even when I'm really not. So throwing a load of laundry in first thing takes me 5 minutes. It's going. Dishwasher, same thing. If it's full, I go ahead and get that done so that when I am getting up and thinking about, okay, now family's going to start coming home, then I already have those things already done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about you, Jen? How do you sort of, or Ashley, how do you kind of manage the easy distractions in your own home?
Go. I don't know. Easier to do clean just under control. I think like you were cleaning, so
Right.
you there on. I think is no I found that I think
Mm.
out keep all
Yeah, I'm impressed by your level of discipline on that. And I sort of like the thought process of you wouldn't make yourself late to the office because your house is dirty. Why would you do it when you're working from your home office? That's a great way of thinking about that. This is our last question. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to add, go ahead and post them in the chat and we'll throw them in at the end. But our last question is around staying connected with other people. And how do you do that? How do you make sure that, you pointed out, how do you make sure you don't go entire days without speaking to human beings?
I think it's am I going first on this one? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt Jen. Okay. I think it's a learned process. Absolutely. And I think that virtually every freelancer I've ever known has had to figure out what works for them. And some people work great at night, right? So they'll, have their days free and then kind of be night owls with their projects. For me personally, I've tried to really invest heavily in my social life outside of work, which just serve two purposes. On one hand, it keeps me sane and it keeps me feeling like I have a life outside of this office. And on the other hand, it's actually connected me with a lot of people that I now network with in one way or another. So companies that I work with, I met the founder of one company that I just signed on with, like at a hockey tournament a couple of weeks ago. I've met, again, a freelance graphic designer that I work with when I don't want to do the design work for a client. I've met web designers and coders and all sorts of different people just socially that now are in my professional network. So I think that's been the biggest piece for me.
Yeah. Meeting people at a hockey tournament sounds like a very Montana way to network.
It is, yes. But you do
Jen,
what you have to do. Go along here.
Jen, I know you said you, especially in the beginning, would go to the gym a lot.
Yes, I would. I love the classes that our gym offered because that's where I met a lot of people, and we would hold each other accountable for coming to classes, and we would support each other in that way. And something else that I found, which might not work with everybody's personality, but Google Calendar has a way of, you can create goals that Google Calendar will put in sometime in your day and send you a notification. So once a month, once a week, whatever would work for a person, you could set that time, and it would, so let's say you want to make sure that you see or call a friend once a week. Now, for myself and a lot of other freelancers that I know, the days kind of go by really quickly. And before you know it, it's been 3 weeks since you've talked to a close to your friend of yours. And that's not good for relationships or for anybody. So if you create this event in your calendar, it comes up and it reminds you and prompts you to make that phone call or to make that date or whatever. You don't necessarily have to tell the other person, hey, you're in my calendar today, you're on my to-do list to call, but you have made this commitment to where you're going to be present and you're going to be prepared to be present with that person while you're talking with them, which I think is nice. So that's something that I just discovered, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun for me.
Oh, that's a really great tool. I've never heard of that, but that's great. I'm definitely going to use that. I suffer from the same challenges of time just going by, and I haven't reached out to people that I, love, basically.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to open it up. I don't see any questions, so we'll give it a couple of seconds here, see if anybody wants to chat any in. All right. I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's webinar. I'm so glad we were able to do this. We're going to have another webinar coming up next month on financial planning for the new year for your business, which I know a lot of you have expressed some interest in. And then after that, we're going to talk more about marketing yourself. So Jen and Ashley, thank you so much for sharing your insight and expertise today. If anyone watching this has any additional questions or you'd like to connect directly with Jen or Ashley, you can always find them in Jottful Community. Just search for them in the directory. And if you'd like to reach out to me or Jottful, feel free to send an email anytime to hello@jottful.com. Thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful remainder of your day. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.